comprehensive risk management webinar on pensions, Social Security, a dialogue. Experiences on Social Security institutions related to risk management with regards to pensions. This is a virtual dialogue of the Social Security Inter-American Conference, August 12th, 2021.
Muy buenos días, buenas tardes,
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you to all of you that are with us And I want to thank the participants because today and in this important webinar, we are going to have comprehensive risk management for Social Security institutions with regards to pensions. As I mentioned, we have everything we need. We want to talk about the experience related to risk management in Social Security institutes. And here, this is a topic that has to do with talking and trying to talk about sustainability and with everything that has to do with the pension system in the latest time. This way, today, we are going to have an exchange. We are going to share experiences where we have been intensively working and we have seen important experiences and we are looking to have the proper sustainability, and because of the pandemic how much we have a more complicated scenario because we've been affected by the pandemic. And here uh, here this is a very important aspect, and we have a lot of people that are with us, and we're going to have this important participation on behalf of Alfredo Hernandez Prado, and we would like to welcome him dearly. We are going to be sharing with him, and also we have Mr. Fernandez. We are very pleased to see him now, and we want to welcome you to the webinar, Mr. Sanchez also. So I would like to mention on behalf of the Inter-American Conference of Social Security, the CIS. Therefore, today we're going to be working with the coordination of Dr. Prado Zurita, and she is our research coordinator because the person that was going to coordinate this webinar didn't feel good and is presently with COVID. So we are also in a transmission and we are in contact with them, and we are doing telework. However, we have to do this work of being able to share with you these things. Dr. Subrita studied her bachelor's degree in economics and has a master's in social studies in the social economy from the Autonomous Metropolitan University in the unit of Iztapalapa. She studied economy. She has a master's in economy from the National Autonomous University, UNAM, and she has done a lot of research in the Federal Bogota University. She has published several articles on financial topics, economic policies, banking systems, financing, economic development, and the research is concentrated in particular in topics such as uh, information technologies, communication, social communications in the Latin American network. Therefore, we have economic development, macroeconomic situation, financial systems, etc., financing, monetary policy, credit, financing, amongst others. She has given trainings at a level of bachelor's degree in the Metropolitan University and in the Bayanam University, in the Technological University. And she's a specialist on administrative systems management from the conference, and she does research programs where she also works as a teacher. She has different courses that she provides, and this morning we are very happy and very pleased to have her because this morning is going to be very fruitful with all of these presenters, and we hope to have the participation also of the people listening to the webinar that are here present with us, in particular regarding the questions, comments, and recommendations that we're going to do. So here we're all ready, and thank you so very much for your participation. Thank you so much, Dr. Daisy Corrales, for your introduction and the kind welcoming words. So, as mentioned very well by Dr. Daisy Corrales, I'm on behalf of Gabriela Musman that coordinated the whole participation, that she was with us all the time. So, we would like to acknowledge her for the organization of this webinar that no question has very interesting participations. We greet her, and she is connected, and we hope that she gets well very quickly. With nothing further, I'm going to start, and I'm going to start with the presentations. We invited participants to leave us their questions in the chat. So at the end, there's going to be feedback on behalf of our participants, and this is going to be very interesting. And now I'm going to start with a reading of what Dr. Guzman shares with us as the situation and how important this topic that is going to be debated in this working table. The actuarial job within Social Security institutions is a key point for the sustainability, for the financial sustainability of these institutions. With this side, we have risk management that depends on the comprehensive risk management that that's adopted by each institution according to international and national standards. Accordingly, the particular case of Mexico allows us to examine from the practical and academic point of view the two pensions that we have at present, two pension models. So we're going to continue in the order that your presentations are. We're going to give the floor to Alfredo Hernandez Prado. And Alfredo Hernandez Prado, he's a financial analyst expert, 25 years of experience and knowledge in risk management of portfolios and credits of investment prospects and operation counterparts, and has lots of experience in quantitative and qualitative experience, as well as bank supervision and assessment units. He has a wide perspective of the financial sector and regulatory framework because of their professional path in several institutions, such as LATAM, Profuturo, Grupo BALC, the National Banking and Securities Commission, the Central Bank in Mexico, Prosar and Pensionista. He has a bachelor's. He has a bachelor's in applied math. He has a diploma courses in econometric dynamic models, and he's a professor in management by ITAM University. He has pre-university studies in Hallandale and Fretum. I apologize because it's going to be very difficult for me to say this word. And thank you. Thank you so much from Norway. He has a course in research on surveys from the Michigan University in the United States, diploma courses in statistics in the Kent University, and a master's in administration, business, and research from the Liverpool University in England. Today, he has a PhD and teaches on behalf of in the teaching development program, has been a professor in Oman, ITAM, Ibero-American University, Merval, PIB, amongst others. He's also been a coordinator of a risk management diploma courses, and he's an assistant professor in the Chicago University. I'd like to tell each one of you that we've thought for each of you to have 25 minutes for your presentations. I can start telling you around when you're close to the 25 minutes. So we'd like to give the floor Professor Alfredo Hernandez Pardo. So thank you. Thank you for the presentation. I'm delighted to participate with you in this webinar. And yes, I've prepared some technical, practical papers for you and materials for you. I'm going to share my PowerPoint screen. Give me a second. So can you see my PowerPoint? Yes, we can. So this is comprehensive risk management in pensions and experiences of the Social Security institutions in Mexico, CIS, etc. So what is the agenda? I have 4 points. Risk management, comprehensive risk management. It has had a serious evolution in the last few years. And to mention the risk faced by Social Security institutions in pension provisions. Also, a definition of defined contribution plans and defined benefit plans, and a comparison of Social Security programs. So with regards to comprehensive risk management, the implementation of the comprehensive risk management corporate systems is one of the main priorities of organizations. Therefore, in the new norm ISO 9001 in 2015 innovation that is more interested is the one that has to do with risk management. Comprehensive risk management has to do basically in detecting in a timely manner the different risks that can affect enterprises or companies to generate strategies that are anticipated to them in order to turn them into opportunities, profitability opportunities for the corporation. Sustainability is that's why it's so important to mention that sustainability is important today. The organizations with greater success don't assume the risks. They study them, then analyze them, and take advantage of them, modeling them to their liking, to manage them properly, and take the best advantage of them. Said in other words, companies are able to transform risks and opportunities that help them progress on the growth path and productivity path as well. So what are the main features that corporate risk managements have? So this is a process, it's an ongoing process that flows throughout the entity, is done by people from the organization at all levels, is designed in order to identify occurrences that could affect the entity, is able to provide a reasonable security to the board of directors, and here it's important in order to achieve their goals, improves the agility of risk management systems to adapt themselves to the surrounding that provides greater trust in the risk elimination and achievement of goals. And finally, that clarifies and improves communication and information flow. And to this end, it's important to underscore what is the risk-based thought. These risk management strategies have to do with transferring the risk to the best part of the organization and reduce the negative effects of the risk, accepting and mitigating through controls some or all the identified risk consequences. The model POCCM developed by Matthias Asted, a Norway person from Norway, is going to habilitate the goals of thoughts organizations based on thoughts and risks. So this is a process. This is a culture, competencies, and management. These are the components. In order to manage the implementation of the quality and risk, we have to add value to the organizations through strategy and innovation. So this is a brief definition of the POCCM model. Processes must be mapped, improved, documented, and carried out according to the consensus and common sense. And there is no good risk management if processes are not mapped. Full stop. And that is in public and private organizations. Secondly, the organization must have a clear connection between the strategy and its policies in terms of how it's managed and structured. If there is a fragmentation, transversal or up-down, then the articulation of the strategies of risk management will not prosper. So culture is basic in each organization, and it should be considered for the implementation of the risk-based thought. So it's explained by itself. Competencies. Competencies are important. Organization has to ensure personnel has the skills and the necessary knowledge in order to collaborate in risk management. And today we have to think in transversal terms. It's not enough only to have these verticals that we're used to seeing in the organizations, and the social security institutions don't escape this topic. There has to be a transversal cut where we should enable communication, and more than anything else, we know what should be done. And finally, management. If management is considered as a key piece for quality management, not all managers have the values and necessary beliefs in order to support the risk-based thought. And here we get into a peculiar topic that escapes the scope of this presentation, but I'd like to share with you risk appetite. The risk appetite, it happens that in organizations we have areas that are very aggressive, areas that are very conservative, and that has to be solved one way or another. So risk administration or risk management is a group of processes that is supported with a risk aware culture that improves decision making and performance through a comprehensive vision of that an organization manages its risk unique group. This has been said by Gartner, this company that does comparisons at an international level on vendors and risk management systems, and it has to have the several attributes. First of all, the strategy. It has to have an implementation, including the improvements of performance through an efficient government and assignments of risk property. Second, evaluation, identification, assessment, and prioritization of the risk. Third, response, identification and implementation of mechanisms in order to mitigate risk. Four, communication and reports, provision of the best and more appropriate means in order to track and inform the interested parties about the risk response of the corporation. What is important here is we understand all those involved in the process, vendors, clients, and obviously those that generate the services and the products, and regulators, and government bodies, and monitoring, identification and implementation of processes that are also seen these. And this is important, risk management for these goals and the effectiveness of mitigation and the risk controls. And now technology, we have the design and implementation of a comprehensive risk management. So therefore, organizations require a comprehensive view of all the business models and compliance. Therefore, key points and entities and customers. So we have to develop an understanding that requires the risk leaders, and security will address the 6 attributes, and these 6 attributes in a risk management. So now, in order to conclude this, I wanted to share with you this, that we also require leadership and a total leadership that allows us to connect the ingredients and the components of a risk management, and we see them so we see them as measurement and analysis of risks, and we have risk structure, monitoring and management of risks, and risk communication. So this process so this has to do with the leadership that matches the goals, the incidents, and the collaborations, so that they participate, the operation parts, and promoters, collective, that is for all the organization as a whole, and very importantly, empathic. So this is being said by Joseph Guyland in the theory of total leadership. So an example, so this is a risk comprehensive management is provided by us, and it's affordable and it's accessible in internet. And here I put an image of how elaborated can this be. And we start with the monitoring. There is a different components of this process, and they also involve in this framework, involve the monitoring, involve an internal environment, and sharing the goals and identification of events and the measurements of risks. And also, aside from the risks, we have control activities and also information and communication. También we go to the second one, the second part of the agenda. So that has to do with the risks. So that have to do with pensions. And here I would like to have a visual communication, a picture of our friend COVID. On the left, we have the pyramid, population pyramid in Mexico that reached its base and is also going to be invested. And not less importantly, to the concept that we have because of savings and because of the impact that we could have with time. And here's something that I wanted to share with you. is that we have a diagram and we have external diagrams, and it has to do with four sectors: market and reputational. So no organization escapes this, none of it. And it's very interesting to say it. I would like to mention that this has to be considered at the time we have the risk management, because if they fail, they could affect the achievements of the organization. So a risk management process has to consider the following goals. It has to do with strategic goals. It has to do with established goals at the highest level and related to the establishment of this mission and vision of the company. And second, operational goals. It's connected to the consecution of a better efficiency and efficacy in the operations, being efficiency, achieving these goals, and being efficiency in achieving it at the best cost possible. Goals, regulatory goals, compliance on behalf of the organization of all the laws and norms that were identified, and goals related to the information provided to third parties, increase of the effectiveness of the communication, so not only financial, and also for pensions. Mm, so in the evolution of pension granting, so we are going to affect different generations of workers, and we are going to see important figures at the end that are shared with us in CONSAR. So risks faced by institutions, of course, we have an increase, of course, of life expectancy and demographic bonus, and the total reach of the population that's economically active with the population that's economically inactive, replacement rates, percentage of the pension value defined as the last, related to the last wage received, and finally, enough resources to sustain the committed plans. And also this one, and competencies between the contribution plans, between the competencies among the benefit plans defined versus the defined contribution plans. Some have benefits, and those that have gone to Asia to have a defined contribution, and others have allowed for mixes, and that is going to be mentioned by me later on, and also has some place in Mexico too. And look, regarding life expectancy, and now in Mexico, life expectancy has gone up constantly. According to INEGI, for the year 2050, it's going to be 84 years for women and 80 years for men. Look how interesting. In 1930, 1940, life expectancy was 37.5 for women and 36.1 for men. Then in 2010, around 2010, I'd like to mention to you by 1950, this figure is not mentioned, but it would surpass 50 years of age. Can you imagine? So you know who proposes that, who proposed a reference of 65 years as the retirement age for the first time in the world? Who did it? Mariscal Bismarck in Germany in 1939. And what happens with that? That it was easy then. If nobody reached 65 years, it was better to have a pension. Can you remember? And then we go to the demographic bonus. So we are going to have a population that is under 50. So now Olga Sanchez Cordero, the Minister of the Interior, said in 2020, and this is going to have an important impact in the Mexican public policies in Mexico. And Carlos Salazar Lomelin, the chairman of the Entrepreneurial Coordinating Council, said that this information warrants millions of jobs that we have to start creating year in and year out, and visualize that these 11 million of populational increase are going to be transferred into job demands. And I rescued this from an article at La Jornada newspaper. a reduction of 2.4 million people, the economically active population, from going from 57.8 million to 55.5 million, from the 2 million of people that are outside the economically active population as a result of COVID. The recovery is in around 10 million for the second month of 2021. In February of 2021, NON reported an economic participation rate of 56.7 of the population in working age, 3.4 points, percentage points under February of the previous year. It's important to underscore that economically active participation rates of men and women are different, 74.3 for men and 40.9 for 74.3 for men and 40.9 for women. Not only we have a low economically active population, this is a challenge, but it also discriminates between men and women. And data from INEGI. And here we reach the replacement rates. And to this end, I have the statistics from the OECD. Replacement rate is the percentage of wages received during the working life of the worker that represents a monthly pension of 27.7% in Mexico. So here, look at us. Here is where we are in comparison to the other countries of the OECD. In Mexico, we find ourselves in a very low decile, statistically speaking. And according to as the table goes, it goes to the right, country by country, we're surprised that India has a replacement rate that is 90%. And there's many countries that are over 50%, 25, 30%, and here we have countries that are over 55 and higher in their replacement rate. This I obtained from a document of the central bank. And the electronic registration system, let's talk about defined contribution plan and defined benefit plans. Here we have, and no, here it is, it's coming. So here, what I'm interested in telling you are the definitions. So there is a dichotomy because the electronic registration for pension plans, IREP, foresees 4 plans following the classification used by the OECD. The defined benefits, the benefits are determined according to the wages during the working time. The plan is assumed by the sponsor of the plan, the company or the state. And the defined contribution, the benefits depend only on the balances of the workers, individual worker. The plan doesn't ground any warranty on the performance, on the final pension grant and minimum benefits, and the contributions to the individual account could be carried out by the plan sponsor, the worker, or both. But here we have 2 additional models, hybrid. The benefits are connected to an accredited performance rate that is connected to the contributions defined in the plan rules in an independent manner, according to the real performance of assets, or is estimated with regards to the real return of assets and the minimum profitability warranty specified in the plan rules. And finally, the mixed one that is made out of both schemes, defined contribution and defined benefit. So the hybrid and mixed were only one category. In the 2015, this data is obtained from CONSAR. Today, less than half of the recorded plans before CONSAR are based in a pure defined scheme, but this type of plans continue being used in combination with defined contribution schemes. And this I quote because also in the Social Security institutions, we can see some of these mixes, and it's interesting to see how are they complemented with the rest of the vendors of pensions. So what for? In order to have a pension that is extensive throughout the year. And here I have the comparison. And if you can see, the benefit schemes every time are less and less. And the defined ones are relatively stable in time, and the hybrid are the ones that start earning more space. And if we add hybrid, then at the beginning of the period analyzed, 96 against 2020, then 24, 25 years later, we can see that they have been they applied. We can see them 19 against 46%. So between mixed and hybrid. And then at the end, so this is going to go half because this is a contribution of the last few years and the definition one, and it has increased importantly. So now 28.4% of the plans recorded are open. They covered workers that work in the company, and they are offered to those that are coming in. And on the other hand, the closed plans only are for a limited group of workers or former workers that have been requested. And historically, workers, active workers, have represented more than 90% of the population. However, if they are only considered in the group of plans reporting at least one pension, the proportion is of the pension part are going to be reduced in the next few years. In 2014, we see 16 active workers per each pension part, and now this year of the three previous one, we report around 11 active workers per each person that has been pensioned. And now we can see the trend with time up to date, and now we can see a pie chart where we can see how this coverage is being distributed according to active, inactive workers and workers that have been pensioned. And here we can see the histogram of how these plans have been distributed and throughout the institutions. So we have in the hybrid 11.6, in the mix we have 25.5, in defined benefits we have the higher one with 46.4, and finally defined contribution with 16.5%. And with this, I conclude my presentation. And I don't know, maybe, and we are going to, I don't know if we have time, if there's time for questions. And Professor Alfredo, we wanted to leave the questions at the end after everybody has presented. So we want to thank you because you were limited by time. So this is a topic that is very interesting from the analysis that has been introduced in the risk analysis, and this is quite interesting. And you leave us with this uncertainty towards the challenges being faced by institutions into the future. Thank you. Thank you, Professor. Now we're going to go with the participation of Maria del Carmen Fernandez, and she is the head of special projects in the insurance, pensions, and social security of the Ministry of Finance. And her main responsibilities are the development of strategic projects in related topics to social security and risk management according to agencies, dependencies, and federal government entities. She has more than 30 years experience in actuarial consultancy and risk consultancy, pension systems, and social security systems in the public environment as private environment. In her path, we can underscore the projects developed as an external vendor or as part of the institutions for the Mexican Social Security Institute, the Social Social Security, Institute of Workers of the State, several institutes of Social Security for Petroleros Mexicanos, amongst others. Carmen Fernandez obtained the title of actuary in the National Autonomous University in Mexico. She had diploma courses in actuarial and statistical courses in the Autonomous Institute of Mexico and has participated in several specialization courses given by the World Bank and the Harvard University. And we'd like to give the floor to Maria del Carmen. And thank you so much for your participation. To the contrary, thank you. And thank you for allowing me to participate in this important seminar. And now I'd like to give the floor that you can see. And now we wanted to say that we want to see that and tell me if you see it because I don't see you. And now I'm going to make this larger. So now I'm going to talk to you about my experience and in risk management in the different pension systems that I've participated since the development. And so now, the technical topic that was spoken by Javier, there are some relevant topics that are important that we understand. And so the reforms of Social Security. So now this is since 1930s, and we implemented the law of Social Security that covers workers and that are in a private entity, and also the ISTE, that is the Social Security of the state workers, that is the Social Security, and there we also had some entities and some states that have been assimilated to one another that have peculiar points. And so that is why we have the law 73, and that is parametrics. And now the law of Social Security in 1992. Now we implemented the law of the savings for the retirement fund, and we implemented the first contributions, defined contributions, 2% of the wages of workers that have that are going to individual accounts. And after 1997, there's an important reform of the new pension system of the Social Security law. Nevertheless, here, what I wanted to illustrate that it's not a static, it's not a reform is done, no, because in 2001, there was another reform to the Social Security law, for example, an adjustment to the pensions that they had due to inflation, and then also things that we had. And in 2007, we did an important reform to the law of ISTE, and because we have defined contributions, it was very different from Social Security. In 2009, we did another contribution adjustment. We adjusted and we also had jurisprudence also of what is the maximum quotes. And I'm sorry, but I apologize because there's a lot of noise because there's a bus that is going through and I cannot avoid it. And for example, in 2020, we also saw a different law for Social Security, and together with that we adjusted the contributions, that we have the minimum pensions, and that we also have an organic thing that is always evolving. It's not like it is done and it's going to stay like that and is written in stone. It was more stable before, and as you can see, there's important changes that are more frequent for us. Okay, so here we have pension systems. No. And we have three generations, pensioners, that I have not seen any reforms that have changed. and that are changing, that are current. So here we have these changes and they stay the same, and now they are adjusted to inflation, and we have another indicator. So they sometimes they're positive once it's granted, they are kept, and the new generations start into the new system that is defined distribution or hybrid, or the ones that Alfredo mentioned. And now the truth is that this personnel doesn't exist with name and last name as affiliates or workers in the system.
So it's easier to affiliate them or to have them be part of this new system. The theme that's of highest complexity is happens amidst the transition. The personnel or staff, even if they have 1 day of work in this system, they have some rights acquired or some sort of rights. I mean, you have to acknowledge what the worker has done. And that's the death, the step towards like some sort of death. You see the Mexican charros. You see they're swapping horses from one to the next. You can't stop. We have to think about how, in analogy, we have to implement this whole system and acknowledge the workforce, the staff who've been working for a while. We have to acknowledge the time or the period in which they've been part of that system. It's crucial. In risk management, we have to obtain the total information. What's their income? What's the law they receive their income under? The employer, their history, their database. I mean, and I'm going to be talking about other type of employees and about the things that we have to face when these amendments took place in our law. There were so many surprises, there were so many gaps because I mean we didn't have the information digitalized partially only, but it's we have to build a puzzle. Think about it logically. If we're thinking that these systems started back in the 50s, 60s, it wasn't easy to have digitalized information like the bulk info. Another point, like the record or the registration of the employees, the whole list of them. I mean, having a record of it. I'll give you an example. I'll put myself as an example. I'm Maria del Carmen. Somebody could call me Maria Carmen, Mari. For the same system, these three names are three different people. So it's increased complexity in our whole system when we're trying to build the database of information to go through the actuary assessment, the whole evaluation of it. And amidst this transition, there's another point. There's different schemes. Number one, the worker will select. I mean, when there was the amendment, there was the amendment to the act of the East or Social Security Institute. I mean, if they're going to receive a bonus due to some acknowledgement because of their work prior, or which law is going to be applicable in the whole IMSS or Social Security entity. I mean, when the worker is a retiree, which scheme is convenient for the worker, she could select or should select. When the employee decides, I mean, they're the liability or this part of the scheme who will receive a pension, which will be paid by through the state. That can change things significantly. Another scheme, thinking about the current context in Mexico, I'm talking about the two branches of the system. There's not only two branches. The pension scheme as is, speaking about it globally as a nation, it's highly fragmented. There's 1,000 schemes or pension schemes in Mexico. This leads us to unfairness, lack of fairness or that balance when there's gaps. Let's say an employee was working at the National Autonomous University, and because of his years or her years of hard work, maybe the university or the person went to another university to work, and they don't comply with the time frame or the terms and conditions. And then there's overlays in all of this when we think about the employee who can have access to different types of schemes. There what happens is a lack of fairness. Coverage isn't full coverage. There's two major systems. Okay, there's independent or autonomous workers that are not part of the system but are voluntarily sometimes, but they don't have that full coverage. All of this, which I'm talking about in its dynamism, doesn't make it feasible in fiscal terms. Companies or the employer offers benefits for the employees, but just let's say there's only around 2,000 there's only like 1,000 companies that are registered that are working along with the social security entities to provide benefits to the workers. Another very interesting point is that we don't have a body, an entity, or a regulator of all the systems. CONSAR, let me explain this agency. The National Commission of Savings for Retirement regulates the savings or the funds or the trustees. Now, the Insurance Commission regulates like the insurance companies for perpetual benefits. Ames has its regulator, but Ames regulates or has its provisions but does not regulate those schemes. It's a full characterization of it. We think about all the systems. Consider even the unions and their complexity. This might sound very simple, right? We speak of the pension scheme as a one-headed monster, but it's a multi-headed monster. One second. Here, try to give this dimension. Think about the pension schemes in Mexico. It breaks out with the lack of contributions or no fees. It's paid through federal taxes, and some states give back these pensions, but think about the whole thing. In this system, there's these types at state, federal level, and municipal level. In that level, let's say in one federal entity or state, I'll say Merida city. In this city, there's different systems being used, from town hall or city hall scheme. Then there's the sewage unit, the fireman unit, the police force unit, the other entity of the workers of Yucatan, and other workers or regulated subjects that live in Yucatan. So think about the administration of all those layers. The federal level has correlation to IMSS, ICE, the Army, and others. And it unbundles to the next line of the system. There's the scheme for PEMEX. There's the scheme for the Federal Commission. There's a scheme for universities, etc. I mean, there's many programs. There's voluntary programs that companies offer to their employees so they can decide to save individually. It's not the full skeleton. We have to make it all compatible, which is a great challenge, but for public administration and for financing and communicating it all. Another point which I want to explain. We're talking about the liabilities in the pension schemes. This matrix sets back to 2019. Think about the GDP and the pension systems of the obligations. There's assessments that have been obtained through our colleagues from different disciplines. There's 126.30% of the GDP. We're working in this country to pay schemes of pension. This is pre-COVID scenario here, what you see in this slide. Think about it, and it's going to be much more. We're usually trying to focus on the IMSS system. It's gigantic. We're talking about millions of people, 26 million people who are receiving pensions or are active. We're talking about these GDP. It's a liability due to pensions. I mean, per capita, it's not that much. We're talking about 26 million. It's a 70% divided into 26 million. Compare it. Compare 27 of GDP only for 4 million people. The Army in this segment is not that much. Pemex has 5.8% for their pensions for 233,364 retirees or people who are pensioned. There's some active or inactive. The Federal Electric Commission absorbs almost 1% of the GDP for 99,230,000 employees. There's other government institutions. There were so many amendments to the law to stop the pension liabilities, to try to revert the situation. And there's so many federal institution agencies. And we're just talking about this at a federal level. If we drill down to a state level, there's a lot of work to do, because these pensions, even though each state entity has its allocated budget, usually when they're in some sort of bankruptcy or default or they can't pay, it's a debt, it's a liability. or it's a commitment, a binding commitment. I mean, you can promising will not lead you to poverty, but if you promise and promise, think about the budget for infrastructure, for work, for other areas. I mean, you promise to pay the pension now. Here in the slide, let's see if we can finish or I can wrap up earlier. Our aging population leads us to speak about risk. The pension scheme, as it's been mentioned by Alfredo before, these were drafted when the life expectancy was the lifespan of a person was 65 years of age. That's why somebody that obtains a pension that receives at 65 a pension, the person was expected to live 5 or 10 years extra. The lifespan back then, when we turned 65, we were thinking about it's increased. We live 16 years longer. Here we have the baby boomers in Mexico in this graph. Back in the 70s, when the number of children per woman in fertile age was of 7 back then. That was just the average. There were families constituted by 11, 12 members or more. Now, the population are having no more than 2. Back then, in that we had a 50% of people under age. Now we have 23% in 2050. The elders, our population, we're measuring at 22%, but it's the 23%. Those who are over 60 will be at 23%. They will be a fourth part of the Mexican population. So this is not something that had been considered in the pension schemes that had been drafted back then when they were designed. It's very difficult, politically speaking, to simply try to increase the retirement age. I mean, it hasn't been done in Mexico. The term in which you will be receiving a pension has been amended, it's been adjusted, but the idea of thinking that we're going to have a population that's turning, they're going to be over 65. My brothers are older than me. The situation in the present is different to the past, to the time of my grandparents. When they were like 62 and 63, they're considered like seniors, elders. And I see my brothers who are that age now and they're active and working. But in the collective ideology is like when you see a person that's in their 60s, it's a senior or an elder. We have to change our mindset. The structure of Social Security, for example, in the last or recent projects that I've been part of when I was working at IMSS, we had like some sort of day centers for our senior population because we have a lot of institutions or daycare for young kids of 4 and 5, but we don't have the right places for our seniors to be spending a good morning, enjoying their friends and hanging out. That does not exist here. So we had the idea of starting to do this, constitute these agencies. Our population is aging, and we need to give additional support to families. We had in the past families constituted by 7 brothers. The grandfather, grandmother could spend their last years taken care of by 2, 3 people in a household. Now we're talking about the fact that these seniors have had only 2 kids and nobody can leave or take care of the elders. Now, another very interesting subject is society and family. When the pension schemes were drafted, we had the traditional family, mom, dad, who would supply things for home would be the father. The mom stayed at home or was a stay-at-home mom taking care of the kids. What's factual here is that you can see this written in other journals that have been published on matters of Social Security. When somebody becomes a widow, a pension was received by the widow only. There were some exceptions in the law. The man who was widowed received a pension only if he did depend on the woman or the hardworking woman. So, I mean, these situations are not functional because the gender roles have changed. If we think about what was back in the 50s, 60s, 70s to now, there's been amendments because there's same sex like couples or families, and there's like second or people who get divorced and get married again, there's kids, there's now the dogs included it as part of the family. The dynamism at a household is different. The age in which the kids require attention. Maybe if there's kids left as orphans, we have to think with an open mind and adjust the pension scheme to the new dynamism, because in, for example, in Latin American countries, things have happened very fast in our mind. Things our mind hasn't just like adapted as fast to what's happened in society. Sometimes there's immigrants, there's families, and families have changed the way in they're constituted. And lastly, I'd say that I believe clearly that the theme is we have to think about the how to communicate things clearly and debate or lobby about pension schemes. You see this graph, it's in English. You can read your plan, our idea of how the pension scheme works. We've designed
among experts, among lawyer experts on this matter, that they do the current actuarial matters, that they're adjusting according to the budget that we have, times, etc. And we also have these stays within a law, within a decree. And what happens later on? We have the nightmare of implementing it, and that is, that's the least of our troubles. No, it's not true. It shouldn't be like that. It should not be a matter that we can leave for later on. We have to see how are we going to implement the implementation channel, everything that could happen, because from the opinions, from as long as we have enough analysis and as long as we have new systems, new companies, and so this is a total success, the 1999 reform. And now, since the efforts were approved, then we have, and CONSAD had the support and had the muscle to do all the reforms. And we had a specialized company in the database that is called Procesar. And if there is not, if not, we couldn't do that. So we could have political debates. The process starts extending, and we have the links. So this, then we start intervening several projects. So the most emblematic point for me is the pension and retirements from IMSS that doesn't operate as should operate as it is in the statutes, because the union understands one thing, they didn't communicate it well. The topic of communication is crucial. And so here, for example, we have an example in the Easter reform when there's some chats and they were talking to us, to people that chose for example, staying within the previous system, and it was important for them to migrate. And why did you do that? Because somebody told me, because I didn't understand, because the union communicated it wrong, and they were afraid of asking, and so they didn't have the casuistic, because not all cases are the same. So why saving? And by saving many times, because they went over, because the most important step that was approving the decree is already there. So you put aside the communication. And that is, and something else. We also have the actuaries, sorry for my colleagues that are listening there, and the lawyers. We are very poor communicators. We should have done a campaign that we should hire someone so that they would have a lot of clarity. Let's many times, for example, now that we say, what is RP? Many times you just mention acronyms. Let's not talk with acronyms. Let's be clear. Let's have a plan of everything that could go wrong. And let's also make sure that as risk management and as risk communicators, many times, and as actuaries. We are the contributors or the providers of bad news, but it's sad, but it's like that. Not only to do well with our customers or those that hire us, because we cannot put sugar into the medicine. This is not going to be wrong. We don't have enough budget. This is not like that. And somebody is going to have this very, very clear. And let's move away from this point because it is complicated always to be the contributors of bad news, that this is not right, that this is not enough. And in closing, the topic is that another topic is that the actuarial evaluations are done annually. So what happened, and so uh, we have to have more frequent communication of how things are moving, in particular in the first, second year of how the pension fund reform is done. And in general, this is my presentation that I prepared. So it is very quick, it's very general, but I would love to listen to your questions and I will be delighted to do so. Thank you so much. And thank you so much, actually, for sure. This was a presentation that was very, very clear. It leaves us very open to debate. It solves many of the questions, as you said, is going to leave this open to be debated. And I'm sorry that there was a person making a lot of noise and I get nervous and I'm sorry. Well, we understand. It happens to all of us because we also have these people making noise in the street. It happens to us when there's remote sessions. So because of time, we understand this dynamic. And now we are going to give the floor to Professor Hugo Sainz Otero, and he studied economics by the Technological Institute and Higher Studies of Monterrey. He studied finances by the Autonomous Institute in Mexico. He was selected as part of the honorary international stigma because of his high performance in the business school. Therefore, he has certifications regarding risk management and regarding investments. So he has more than 10 years experience, professional experience, focused in social security, pension systems, risk management, and financial analysis. He started his professional path as head of operational planning in CONSAR, where he had projects for the improvement of retirement pensions, transfers, and gathering for retirement funds. So he was one of the people accountable for the implementation of Afores in services and now denominated more CIFORE, that assesses and shows the operational quality of the services that Afores provide to their people. So he was coordinator of advisors of the head of finances of the Social Security Institute of the workers, where he was given the award Recognition of Talent and Institutional Innovation 2017 because he designed, created, and coordinated a statistical portal and informational inquiry for those people and mobility, mortality, amongst others. And also, he was one of the people responsible for the diagnosis and coordination about situations in ISTE. He was able to introduce to the Congress and the Federal Institute the financial reports and actuarial reports of 2014 to 2017. So in this, he has done consulting and innovative initiatives in several projects and institutions. And in 2018, he entered into Afore Pensionista, where he works as the head of services and operational risk management, and also responsible and to design, prepare operational risks of pensioners and their investment funds, as well as the design, integration of the business continuity framework. With nothing further, we'd like to give the floor to Hugo Sanchez. And we continue. Thank you so much. Good afternoon. And I'm very pleased to share with you my screen. I think you can see it very well. And yes, so perfect. And now I'm very happy to be with you today. And well, good day, everyone. I'd like to thank Dr. Daisy Corrales and the head of CS, as well as Gabriela Guzman and Gwendolyn Bravo for the invitation to participate in this webinar. Today, I'm going to talk to you about the best practices of operational risk management in financial institutions aimed at pensions, and in particular, CFORE. And the chat of today is going to deal with the following points. I'm going to give you a brief introduction about the overall panorama of Ford in Mexico. You spoke more about that in the other presentations, and the applicable framework regarding risk management, operational risk in particular. And I'm going to talk to you about the measures and appropriate practices to carry out the risk operational management. And finally, I'm going to make a synthesis about a brief way of how we manage operational risk as well as business continuity. And let's start by saying, what is SAR? SAR is the Mexican system where three-party contributions are deposited in individual accounts, and they are owned by workers. These accounts and resources are accrued for the pension time. So individual accounts are managed by Afore, and these are retirement fund administrators. That is what Afore means, or they are like, yes, FTs, like in other countries, and the resources are invested in investment systems for retirement. Some relevant figures to say what SAR is. So the first quarter of 2021, today we have 10 administrators of pension funds. They manage at least 10 investment funds that are different, that are 10 CFOs, that are generational. There's around 68.2 million accounts, individual accounts, managed by Afores or pension fund administrators, and CFOs have assets for 4,781 or 4,781. So 4.7 billion, that is, they're around 20.7% of Mexico's GDP. So in general, the risks that CONSAR, that is a regular, is a national savings fund for retirements, they have to manage the risks related to market and liquidity. Everything that has to do with the investment of resources, credit risks are also managed, connected to the same investments of these resources of workers. We also have operational risks that for the regulators also include the risks in operational processes, the technological risk, and the legal risk. And likewise, they also require in CFORE to manage what we so call the operations continuity or business continuity, as others know it. So these are the four important points that the risk managers or risk administrators should be managing or regarding risk. However, what is risk? Risk is or could be something that is intuitive. We kind of in an intuitional manner, we understand it. But if we apply it institutionally speaking, according to ISO 31000 made in 2018, risk can be defined as the effect that uncertainty has or could have over an institution goals. It could also be or over an individual also, but usually is a denominator or a definition for the organizational environment. And what are operational risks? Operational risks, and let me give you the simple definition. These are all the risks that are not market risk or they are not credit risk. Any other risk that is not market risk or financial risks are operational risks. And there is a technical definition according to, so this is a possibility of having losses due to deficiencies and on the operational processes and information technology. And now because of any adverse event that is an external event, so it has to do with individual accounts. And also according to the Basel Committee, The operational risk is a risk of loss resulting of inadequate internal processes or failed internal processes of people, systems, or external occurrences. This is something similar. So there is a possibility that losses might occur as a result of human resources, or as a result of how processes are made up or are followed, and also due to technology as well. And the rules and regulations for financial risks are very specific for Afores. They have limits, and they have the methodologies and forms that should be applied to know what is the risk, the financial risk, what is the limit of concentration in investments, or who can you lend or not money to because of the credit quality. So the rules and regulations of CONSAR that establishes operational risk management is more general, let's say. So in a summary, in a nutshell, CONSAR defines, or CONSAR asks Afores, number one, to establish the appropriate measures and practices and enough practices for operational risk management. Second, define goals, policies, procedures, and actions in order to identify, measure, monitor, limit, control, inform, and reveal operational risks. And three, for the business continuity, they ask them to implement contingency plans that will allow them to minimize, control, and repair effects that could be generated due to technical fails or force majeure type of events, and establishing the minimum operational levels. So if we read this very quickly, it could seem, or it looks like something very simple. Nevertheless, how can we understand the appropriate practices to manage operational risk and continuity? And on the other hand, how do we establish, or how an Afore or any other institution is able to implement a continuity plan? And in order to give you an idea and an approximation, number one, we have to understand that in order to achieve good operational risk management, we recommend to establish very clearly two management frameworks that are going to be useful for the institution in order to define the clear rules, the name of the game, or the rules of the game, before we try to implement a full policies of actions. And first, we have to have risk management. This is a group of all these technical actions or tools to manage risk of an institution. And there are several frameworks established by some organizations. As Alfredo, the professor, said, we have the one proposed by COSO, or the Committee of Sponsor Organizations. And we also have another framework that is being given by ISO 31000 that also promotes everything as rules or an overall framework of how risks should be managed. Personally, I find very useful the combination of the framework established by ISO in order to frame the overall risks, or the overall way that risk should be managed in an institution, and combine them specifically with the operational risk management established by the Basel Committee. I'm going to talk to you about that, and it is called ORMF. So first of all, what is ISO? What is the Basel Committee? And ISO is a world federation of national and normalization institutes that establish these best international practices, whereas the Bank Supervision Basel Committee is an entity providing orientation and worldwide regarding financial related matters aimed at the banking system. In particular, the recommendations could also be adapted to other financial institutions. And all of these recommendations are set in the so-called Basel Accords or agreements. Risks are many. Nevertheless, in general, both frameworks agree that a key risk is the one where that could negatively affect the goal of the institution, a key goal of the institution. Therefore, the risks or uncertainty that could not affect the goals of institutions are irrelevant. Therefore, it is also very important to start with an overall framework and with a framework, an operational risk framework that can be defined.
Which are the real objectives of all the global risks that can exist, which are the interesting ones to administrate or manage there. I start with the general scope of the operational risk admin. Here in the 31,000 ISO, we define the iterations of the institutions and their management. We're talking about its implementation in the institutions, which is, this is a constant. There's iterations, it's cross-crop, something that impacts all areas and all layers. It's something that I've commented before, and what we see is that only the risk administrators or who manages the risk need to administrate the risk, and it's not so. Risk management is something that it includes everyone, all levels, all layers of any institution and all structures. Whomever as an entity works with operational risks, they have to have the proper structures in place and know who's going to do what when administrating a risk. Now, this has to work that certain way. So risk management helps institutions build a strategy, achieve objectives, and go through its decision-making process. The ISO frame in its norm, in the standard 31,000, points leads me to point out the first point or chapter of the graph with my diagram. Here, it's all constituted with its fundamentals, the principles, and in general, these mirror the institutional commitment, the engagement. When we speak of risk management, it's clear. If not everyone is engaged from top levels of structure to other levels of the management institution, it would be very difficult for a risk management entity to achieve its objective and generate value. That's a core element. The second element is called the work framework. It defines risk management as an continuous operation work. We design or design the laws and the rules of the risk management. Later, the implementation, the methodology to face any risk or the response. Then we have the assessment of the outputs or results, comment it with any feedback to have like an improvement. And so that's why the ISO standards are in constant improvement. It's constituted all by risk management, which clearly defines the elements that we must comply with to manage any type of risk. This is applicable at strategic level, at project level, at program level, operation level, per se. Or the process will ask you to establish first the project scope, identify and control every risk, keep track and monitor all of them, communicate them correctly, and apply continuous improvement tactic. Now, independently from its structure, many frames of administration just are distilled to four branches: risk identification, risk assessment, follow-up, and response to risk. That's like, those are the constants here. Now, for operational risk, the Basel Committee has its guiding principles to face operational risks, right? Now, this committee has many principles, but according to best practices and principles, the frame of operational risks must be constituted by the following elements: defining the process and methodology to identify operational risks. How are you going to go through an assessment and correct monitoring to establish the control mechanisms to mitigate them? It all matches and correlates or is in harmony with what I showed you in the previous slide, according to the principles or the provisions in the standard in 31,000. We need proper governance that starts also as a major element of the general scope of the project or process. And after this, we have the risk management frame and so on. Lastly, we need to clearly define the scheme of the three defense layers that we have, constituted first of all by the business units of that structure, which must implement the controls in place and follow up and measure risks, a functional area that's independent or autonomous from the area of operational risk that constitutes the provisions along with a methodology and gives guidance to the exercise of what we've said and follows up as an autonomous entity to measure the risks. And lastly, at the third line of response and defense, the auditors, internal and external auditors. This is extremely important for it to be created this way. We don't want people to be confused. We need our people to know who has to administrate managed risk, mitigate it. We must never forget who is in charge of managing a risk, who needs to control the risk and maintain and keep it aligned once a risk might happen. That's where we must always be ready and up to do something. What's the frame and synthesis of operational risk management? First of all, to adequately work under the methodology and management frame, we need to constitute what we call the taxonomy or of risks, of causes and impacts. Why? Because if we don't have a specific understanding or a matrix with all the impact of the risk that's clear, it becomes very complicated to administrate a risk. And it could even pulverize the capacity to identify the risks. And if we can't generate value when identifying a risk, then what's the practical sense of it? Based on the definitions of which types of risks can an institution face, we must preset, or something that was explained by Professor Alfredo in his presentation. It's like the declarations or the declaration of risks. And based on the risk appetite or declarations of risk, we need to set thresholds of tolerance for each type of classification of risk. This is fundamental because what I've seen methodologies that are applied for risks, and they're based on these limits or thresholds, and they try to just simply go through a risk assessment and implement the color code and classify the risks in red, amber, or green. It's senseless because if you don't have a limit in the declaration or risk specifications, you need to adapt or adjust the methodology to face a risk, measure its causes and impact. How are you going to weigh? How are you going to calibrate and measure the impact of a risk? Sometimes some people are just limited by when classifying a risk in medium, high, or low risk levels. If we don't calibrate this accurately, what are we going to understand when we have to think about the probabilistic impacts, which could give us results, and maybe there's subjective actions instead of the objective? In an economist, Kahneman, he is a good statesman too. That's why we need to have all of this data clear. We need to also think about the implementation of stress testing. We do all of this to have clarity regarding what's under the thresholds of tolerance and what's not. I'll give you some tips under the whole frame of information that you can implement and take to practice. One, the thresholds of tolerance don't have to do with the subjectivity of the person who thinks, okay, I don't want a negative impact, but the thresholds of tolerance depend on the exposure that you're willing to absorb, depending on the impact. The definition of limits should always be explained clearly with proper communication, as it's been explained in previous presentations when we speak about risk management. Communication is key, so we can all understand and achieve the right levels of efficacy and what our objectives are. The simpler things are, the better. That's the gold rule. Once we establish the risk declarations, we identify the risks and ponder them, the cause of the risk and the impact, to establish controls to make face or front to the risks which are under the levels of tolerance. We have the proper metrology to know if we're taking on more risk than we should or less. How do we measure how effective we are? By sorting things out. Hierarchically, we can order out risks. Volatility is something that could also be considered. We need to know the root causes of the risks, and establishing a methodology leads us to understand what's the source or the root cause of the risk and the causes. The cause will lead us to understand how to prevent and which are the root causes and measure the right impacts and how to mitigate the impacts and reduce them. Lastly, we must never forget that the objective when administrating risks is understanding the level or thresholds of risks and impact that we're willing to undertake to give the proper response back. That's what's important when we speak about operational risk and risk management. Here, I share with you an example of the correlation of the thresholds of tolerance in operational risk and their management. I'll briefly share the the disruption of a risk in our operation is one of the risks. The risk appetite we can define, we have to understand which are the risks that are declared by institutions. Some are willing to accept, some institutions are willing to accept some disruptions as long as they're low and not critical for the processes of the company. And we have to identify the thresholds of tolerance. We need to think about a risk that has a unique it has no dependency. We need to coordinate, for example, the critical supply chain of vendors that can give us a response facing a crisis. Limit the exposure of key human resources can also be a limit. There might be a very an expert, an examiner in a field that's the only person that knows how to fix a problem. And without the person being present, the institutional falls. Implement the contingency plans, avoid redundance, avoid having security copies, safety copies, and try not to get mixed messages or communication that's wrong. Establish risk thresholds and controls. So you need to have your KRIs or your indicators, your key indicators to follow up and keep track of things. For keeping a business continuous leads us to speak about how to manage the concept of continuity. There might be incidents that can become a contingency incident and they lead us to a crisis. In the worst case scenario, there could be huge penalties applied to an institution, sanctions, or there's a threshold of no return where an institution could simply disappear, where there's no longer an institution present. Now, how do we build a systematic continuity management system? The planning and implementation phase of this is branched out into three main sections. First branch, we must analyze and have priorities in our asset management to identify different types of risks, threats, and vulnerabilities, and overall establish the priorities of the entity or institution. To draft and design strategies, we need to draft the contingency plans and integrate these to the analytical segment in the unit focused on IT management so they can globally design a continuity management system. In the third place, there's a permanent management of the continuity of business. That's when I speak of the administration or management of everything that's been designed and drafted. There's constant testing, trial and error to see how our business is continuous and effective. Our plan must constantly or with certain frequency lead us to measure the impact on our business. These can enable us to continue understanding which are the processes and priorities for an institution. How do we understand which are the priorities in the activities of an institution in case these are interrupted? This happens through a business analysis impact. And now in a synthesis or succinctly, there's four elements sourced from this business analysis. There's the thresholds of time you see the acronym in English. the level of maximum time, or MTPD, I mean, or the time with RTO, the recovery time or RTO of technology. As I told you, the RPO is the recovery point. It's like, how do we update all the assets that we need to lead our operation to be constant in case it's disrupted or interrupted? Now, the minimum level of interruption should be very clear to define which are the activities that, in case there's an impact, we need to have up and running when interrupted. And in a summary, I'll explain how do we respond to a disruption. There is a response depending on the risk or the incident that's taken place. For example, COVID. We need to implement the strategies and follow the plans according to the disruptive scenario. And lastly, we'd like to simply take this operation back to normal. As a conclusion, which are the benefits of operational risk management that leads us to continuity? We protect the interest of the account holders and those who are close to retirement, all assets, and the people who are all in our population saving for retirement. Institution resiliency, which is very important. It's a trend now because of COVID. A decline in losses due to operational issues, greater operational efficiency, and compliance with laws and regulations. And lastly, all this frames helps the institution operate and manage things the best way possible. Challenges to generate value, respect and backup of top management levels, the steering committees. If there's no clear support from top management, risk management doesn't add value, truly. We need to create mindfulness, awareness in the people in the institution so they comprehend the scope of risk management actions and they can implement risk management for other areas. It's something that we have to live with, incorporate the culture of risk management on a day-to-day basis as a routine is basic. The risk unit has to communicate with other units in the structure to discuss matters to see if it's force majeure, the incident was just fortuitous, or you need to inform the people correctly in the institution. And as I've mentioned, historically, in the pension schemes, Mexico has something that's common. In Mexico, we don't have enough data, structured data, to go through a risk assessment of the operational impacts. So we need to build the bedrock correctly and manage that bedrock adequately, or else we're just going to be working in a probabilistic scenario, thinking about estimations. So we're never going to be capable of going through the proper assessment or estimation there. So go through the assessment of things. Thank you very much for your full attention. I leave my personal contact data in case you have doubts or questions. You can also scan the QR, the quick reference code with your photographs. Profit from the use of technology today, and let's keep in touch. Let's keep in touch through LinkedIn too. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Hugo. I believe that it's been an excellent presentation. It's been a great class of risk management. We thank our professor and we thank all our panel members in general. All together, we have made this webinar's dynamism very interesting for us all, and we're thankful. I'm sorry, I wasn't being seen on the screen. So I was thanking you all, and I was writing in the chat box. I'm gonna read some questions that have popped up. Thank you for asking the questions correlated to the presentation. I'll start in the order, the right order with the, okay, by doing this, we'd focus now on the questions for Professor Alfredo. Professor, there's 3 questions for you. Do you want me to read them one by one? Let's read them one by one, Ceci, please. Okay. Ms. Rosa Maria Farrell says, the hybrid is an account plan that's individual, and is it at a national scope? The hybrid one, at the end of the day, is the defined contribution or fee payment with a defined benefit. It really is, let's say, it's a technical concept. In the hybrid type, for the future pension recipient, you contribute, you pay your fee, but with a rate, a preset rate, right? So that's why it was considered, the hybrid was considered previously the mixed type, but in reality, it's just a technical definition of the concept. Let's not forget that there's other models like savings fund, the employee pays half of the resource and the company, the employer pays the other part of the fee, the other 50%, or the mixed model. There is a pension scheme established by the institution, by the company, and the worker can pay his or her fee. An additional payment can be done. I answered the question? No. Thank you very much, sir. Now, there's two extra questions from Carlos Zúñiga. The plans have private and volunteer character. You can either pay as a volunteer. I mean, these plans depend on Social Security. Okay. Our actuarial expert, Maria del Carmen, can correct me. No, they enhance each other. Like recently in a company with some Dutch entrepreneurs analyze their tripartite system. They have a defined system thanks to the government. The next segment is is paid by the employer, the entity that hires, and the Dutch employee can pay an extra fee like a savings fund, an afore. I mean, you add all those payments up. That's what's interesting about what happens with the Dutch. Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. The other question is, which services are provided besides the benefits or the pension to obtain higher levels of profitability? Which services are provided or are offered? Well, once again, I'd say that we can think about combining the system or the method that the Dutch have. Because if we see what the Swedes did or the Norwegians did, well, no, but Norwegians have defined benefits, period. That's based on their law. And the Swedes have, it depends on them. They can elect, they can select a defined contribution or defined benefit. Ironically speaking, we think about analyzing this potential, the potential that we found in this model, besides the amendments, the adjustments, and it's used throughout time. If we have the proper definition of things at a national scale, this could be enriching. I mean, we can capitalize. It could be extreme. We can do so much with what we have. We can build so much more. A colleague of mine quoted or said something, and and he said, there's other options. The theme or the core theme is that the pension has to be paid under grounds of fairness, that everybody has the right to have a pension, and that leaves a lot of work to do on our hands. Yes, sir, of course. Thank you very much, Professor Alfredo. Now, I'm going to focus on the questions for our expert in actuary, Maria del Carmen. The first question is for you, ma'am. The first is question, okay. The first question is from Juan Carlos Zúñiga, is how do I adjust amidst the transition phase? How do I adjust the benefits amidst the transition phase there? I didn't get the structure of the question clearly, but there's different methods. One way, for example, is as the Institute on Social Security did for the workers of the state. There was a cutoff to measure the time of the employee in the entity. I mean, to measure his or her time, whether they're professors, first responders, or people working in the healthcare system, they were giving their hard work for 30 years. If the employee had been offering his services for 20 years, then you had to calculate the expected pension that the person would receive when retirement happened, the net present value of the pension. And it's not exactly like that. Just to give you an understanding of the whole concept, and the mechanism is there clearly. There's the present value in actuarial terms, and then there's the actuarial discounts to achieve the principle or comply with the principles of fairness. There's another mechanism that EAMS applies. There's members or beneficiaries in the new pension scheme of IMSS, as I've said. And when they obtain their pension, the employee decides that the derogated law is convenient for him or her. And if they decide to select the derogated law, the balance of their individual. So there's a lot of complexities in the actuarial tasks. You just see a little square, and it's highly complex, really. But these are the two main options. There might be combinations of these options, but that's the response, the general response. Okay, thank you very much. Another question is from Leticia Felicidad Treviño. What's your opinion regarding the change in the calculation of IMSS pension schemes and minimum wages and UMAS, or units of minimum wage? When we had the acronym, which is the unit of measurement of administration, I don't like to use acronyms a lot because our colleagues from other countries might just think that it's like complex, and that's why the unit that we use to measure, UMA or UMA, is a way or what we use to adjust what we need to calculate depending on inflation. When the law in the Gazette was established, in which we read the unit of measure was not applicable, my personal opinion is that that should not have been implemented or taken into positive law, positive effect. And they justified this back then because, I mean, prior to what happened, they offered minimum wage, but the incremental number of the minimum wage depended on inflation. So things happened the other way around. So the decision that was taken back then was not fair, but we couldn't foresee that this would happen after. And the minimum wage should have been left as was. They asked me, but they didn't pay attention to what I had told them back then when that happened. The third question comes from Mr. Carlos Zúñiga, which is the replacement rate currently? Well, as we've been discussing, what type of replacement are we talking about? We're talking about the diversity of the pension schemes. It's not yet defined. The new system used by IMSS is a defined contribution system with an individual account. There's the minimum, there's the thresholds. It can vary depending on age and what the employee has accumulated or accrued. There's another system. There's a system of laws. There were laws of defined benefits that depend on properties such as age, years of service, and the average. It's not only one, it depends on variables. That's why it's so crucial to have correct communication, as I expressed in my slideshow. The employee doesn't know what to design because if it's defined contribution, it depends from the term in which you've worked. And if it's defined, it depends on your income and other properties. And if you change your professional life. In other countries, I've seen that it's like a benefit for all, but here we don't have an indicator for that. Okay, agree. Thank you very much. Here we have another doubt from Mr. Miguel Rivera. I would like you to explain what do we do with that 126% of our GDP? He says it's impressive data. How do we do things? What we've had to do is try to contain with reforms, parametric reforms, and amendments to the law. We don't want this liability, like the fiscal cost or the payments by the government to grow with these liabilities. That's why I talked about this with the Afore or retirement savings entities, so we can at least, simply, we don't want to have the employees to receive the minimum pensions when they've worked for the state. When the professional selects to use the previous law or the general act, it should benefit them as much as possible. And we have to sort things out, reorder. You think about, where do you obtain those numbers? It depends on the assessment, the actuarial work, and we have the formula with net present value, the GDP, and other elements. It's not as if we just have to pay the quantified amount in one bullet payment. It depends on the expenditure. We need to reveal things clearly, because if there's temptation, when there's changes in an administrator, when there's an electoral process, it's like we have to understand that sometimes the systems cannot tolerate more. It's either that, or some of our colleagues, we've seen the following, and I'll say, some of the money can be paid in the present administration, but the future administration has to pay these costs. But then the LIO, the Labor International ILO, um, uh, not only has one pension scheme, you have to think about the replacement rate and what's going to happen between our population's generations. We need to adjust. What's happening now is those who are receiving a pension now are living with sensational pensions with great benefits, but the generations that are just barely starting to be part of the workforce are not going to achieve that. I can summarize the response. What should we do? We should be capable of containing that, communicating things correctly, and start thinking about what can happen if we change the age to achieve a pension. We need demographic analysis of the universe. You were talking about the graph of COVID a while ago. Our demographics leads us to no surprises, even when there's a pandemic or there's COVID. The trends were foreseen. That's why there's a thorough analysis in which we analyze trends. It's not like that suddenly we're older, we're aging. No, we saw this coming from the 90s. We have to foresee the trends, adjust depending on that, debating in the political arenas with serious examiners. We're talking about experts, real experts, not experts that think of themselves as experts, that just studied through a TV tutorial. We need real experts at the table sitting to debate. Thank you very much. I think your answers have been clear, and you give us a lot to think about. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge regarding pension schemes. For Professor Hugo Sanchez, there's a question, sir, and I understand it's the question that's focused on the first set of your presentation from Maria Morales. She wants to know how many inactive accounts exist. Well, the number, just a number, an exact number, the commission or the CONSAR doesn't have that number. I haven't found it, but it varies. We have to understand what's an inactive account. CONSAR, or the commission, defines it as an account that has not received any deposit in 3 years. Out of these accounts, like for example, the Afores, savings, I'd say that 50% of IMSS accounts that administrate Afores today are inactive. In average, it'll vary, but 50% of the administrated account under the IMSS regimes are inactive. And for the ISTE accounts, it's a bit less than that. It's around a 20%, just to give you an average of the administrated accounts or savings account that are managed. You see the difference there with the systems. IMSS is bigger. The Mexican Institute on Social Security is open for all the population, for all the private sector, for all. It could be an indicator of labor or workforce rotation, market structure, or employment or workforce in Mexico. There's a great deal of people hopping to regular settings or as regulated subjects or unregulated subjects, which does not happen that much with the labor structure of federal employees that tend to be people in their position or in their formal job as regulated subjects for longer. I can give you those numbers. I can give you just percentages now. Thank you very much, Professor Hugo. Well, we thank you all for having been present. Thank you I thank our panel members. We thank our participants. It's priceless. I saw a question from Maria Rubira. just quickly, if you allow me to, she's asking about the correlation between operational risks and financial risks. Is there an operational risk that can affect and have a create a financial risk? I'll give you two examples quickly. When you buy or sell an asset from an investment, what can happen is we could face discrepancies, inconformities. Maybe in the management or savings administrator entity, they can say, okay, I'm buying these number of assets with a rate of 1%. And that's the process. Then the financial institution sends a letter of the negotiation and specifies that it was not a 1% risk. Who is saying what's right? I mean, in those cases, you have to keep track and document the binding agreements or the procurement or the asset acquisition. Because I mean, it's not your party or my party who's right. There is like some sort of ruling and there's a screen and we agreed and see how much money. And all of this can have an impact. So that can also have an impact on the financial matters that we deal with. You can have the capacity to invest. You can delegate or appoint someone to invest 1,000,000 pesos or dollars to an analyst. So you give that analyst 1,000,000 instead of 80% of all your list of accounts. And we're talking about hundreds and millions of dollars. So what we have to do is draft policies or the right provisions in which we establish which are the thresholds of investment. Only the head of investment can give an approval or an authorization of those levels of investments. I'll give you an example of operations that impact financially speaking. Thank you very much, Professor. I think they sent you that question in private, so that's why I couldn't read it. So I'm sorry about that. Professor Alfredo, do you have further comments? Just adding to or adhering myself to what Mr. Hugo, our professor, just mentioned, I just understood that a new risk classification, financial, business, and non-business assessment there. Think about how much does an institution has to manage or solve when we speak of risks that impact the institutions. I'll give you an example. The example that you share, that I'm about to share, is real, and I'll correlate it to COVID. It's one of the questions that are open questions there in the chat. You know what's happened? COVID has impacted us in many areas. The financial markets, of course, are being altered. So the procurement of the instruments that the savings fund management bodies need or Afores need to meet the continuous demand, the demand is more and more and more for a savings fund. Obviously, all of the expectations of the yields or the returns, the accrued, has changed. The terms and conditions, the terms of negotiations have changed, as Hugo mentioned, but it also affects us at a non-business level, non-operational business level. Let's give it a thought. Maybe the offices or headquarters or representative offices that could be open or not open due to COVID, the declarations of duplicated accounts that need to take place, the methodologies have changed completely. So I believe that it would be great. I'm sorry for saying it this way, but I think the question was great. It affects all both angles. It affects us in operation and financially, of course, definitely. Thank you so much. And I apologize for having to close the session or the Q&A. I know that today's data I mean, required more of our time, but we're going to continue with after the set of questions by thanking you all for being participating. Madrigal, all professors, panel members, thank you for accepting the invite. We invite you all to follow up on social networks, access our website, follow our different channels. Let's continue learning about these themes based on social security. Without further ado, the floor is open for our chairwoman, Ms. Daisy Corrales, so she can lead us to the closure ceremony. Once again, we thank you very much. I thank our professors present. I thank you, Professor Alfredo, Maria del Carmen, and Hugo. Your presentations were so clear. You enhanced each other's presentations. They were so clear. We could see this. And we analyzed so many points. that could lead us to think about our operations. It's very important for us to continue understanding the pension scheme system for Social Security. When we speak about our systems, we're facing a lot of work. It's titanic. As you've said, I know that in Mexico, you've shown how much you've done here. You've dedicated so much to this. I know it's about justice. I know it's about accountability and being transparent and having resources. At the end of the day, we want to improve the life well-being of our population throughout their work life as professionals. We think about the employee and the employers and the parties. There's so much to do so we can provide the pensions timely, whether the person is fine or has different abilities and we need to continue analyzing risks. As Alfredo said, we need to develop strategic thinking, which is important, and use the models along with the variables. Everything that's been shared here makes us think about the pandemic and how to forecast or analyze the trends, because we have to consider so many factors. We're working with the military, and in Honduras, we heard what they've had to do. For example, with the pensions there because of disabilities and the death rate. There's different types of phenomenon that we need to pay for as a subsidy. The process has to be stronger so we can achieve the objectives. We need schemes for cooperation, work with multidisciplinary groups for Social Security, and train our people under the guidance of empathy. Overall, we need to think about the whole problem and the behavior that we've analyzed. We need to also improve the mental health of our population. There's so many comments. They're all so important. You were talking about the amendments, the reforms, the general acts. Amidst the transition, what Mari Carmen mentioned about the phase of transition leads us to be very mindful. We need to be capable of foreseeing. As you've said, we need to foresee the trends of change amidst the time and the implications that all of these changes have on our people's lifespan and how families are constituted. Families have gone through major changes. All of this has been mentioned. It's extremely important. And communication would allow us to incorporate all the properties so we can be familiarized with them. And at the end, whatever we do will have an impact in the area of health, in fostering health or educating our people. The workforce capacity has declined and there's other people working underage, but we know that there's important best practices. There's operational risks.
And we also have to look into all the internal processes and how can we do a provision if risk management is done properly, therefore directly on work. work is very, very important, and we have to ensure that we abide and we comply with the rules and regulations, and that we manage risk properly, and we have to make sure we also manage resources properly. So what I wanted also to take advantage of this opportunity to tell you that we also have an academic program that has been aimed at top management, and a very strong component regarding information technology and information, because they are very important tools within being able to face the current situation that is complicated, and it end up being more complicated due to COVID, to this topic of the pandemic. So on August 27th, the General Secretary, Alvaro Blanca, has been managing his representatives of the subregions of this conference, and he wants to have a dialogue about everything that has to do with the behavior of pandemic, and also provide responses to social security institutions. Is going to be an intensive day, and we'll be ready for all those people that would like to be part of the activity and give their contributions, because we will try to produce a document that is part of the social security responses in case of a crisis and in crisis situations. So with everything we've spoken, I think it is also very important, because of all of this situation that we've mentioned, that behind all the arsenal of work that we have, that we lead, and the communication with the authorities is also very important. So we also have to ensure to have a universal pension, so that the population with different including the different pensions that they have, that everybody can have pensions, pensions provided by the state, by the private entities, and we have to ensure that our pensioners' life quality is improved. So we leave this debate open, because it's so interesting. So please, we are very happy to be working with a methodology in order to incorporate different experts to provide us with their knowledge for us to improve and do better. So we are at your service on whatever you might need on these trainings and your comments. And the conference will also include the management of projects with technical support for people that require. So with this, I greet you, I thank you, and to the audience, thank you for staying, and for everybody, thank you for your active participation in this interesting webinar. Thank you so very much.